Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be strapping on our harnesses
Oh, yeah.
and taking a deep dive into OSHA's Fall Protection Standard,
All right.
1926.501. Now, if you are in the business of keeping people safe on construction sites, this is the one for you. We're going to break down the essentials so you can build a rock-solid fall protection program.
Yeah, that's right. This standard is like the backbone of fall protection in construction. So we'll unpack its, sometimes dense language. But more importantly, I want to help you understand the why behind the rules and how they translate into practical life-saving actions on your job sites.
I love that. Going beyond just checking the boxes to truly grasping the intent and the impact of this standard. So let's start with the foundation, the General Duty Clause. What's the big idea here?
Well, 1926.501A is all about employer responsibility. It mandates that you, the employer, provide fall protection systems that meet very specific criteria. And not just any system will do. It has to align with the detailed requirements laid out in 1926.502. We'll get into those specifics later, but the takeaway here is that you can't just throw up any old rope and call it a day.
So it's not just about having something in place, it's about having the right thing in place. What else does this General Duty Clause emphasize?
Well, it also highlights the importance of a solid foundation. Literally. Walking and working surfaces need to be strong enough to support workers safely. Think of it this way. Even the most advanced fall protection system is useless if the platform itself crumbles beneath your feet.
Yeah, that's a point I think that gets overlooked sometimes. It's easy to focus on the harnesses and guardrails, but the structural integrity of the work surface is equally crucial. For our listeners, think about the implications if this general duty is neglected. We're talking about potential accidents, injuries, even fatalities. This isn't just paperwork, it's about people's lives.
Exactly. This general duty clause is the bedrock of your fall protection program. The legal and ethical obligation to protect your workers from the most prevalent hazard in construction. Neglecting it isn't just risky, it's irresponsible.
So we've got the big picture, the overarching duty to protect. Now, let's zoom in on those specific work scenarios outlined in 1926.501B. I always find this part fascinating because it shows how OSHA really tries to account for the diverse realities of construction work. Let's start with something pretty fundamental: unprotected sides and edges.
Unprotected sides and edges, those are your classic fall hazards. Section B1 kicks things off by saying if you've got a drop of 6 feet or more, you need protection. Whether it's a platform, a scaffold, a roof edge, anything like that, it's a trigger point for fall protection.
So 6 feet, that's the magic number. And I'm guessing the types of protection required aren't exactly one size fits all.
You're right. Different scenarios call for different solutions. For these unprotected sides and edges, OSHA lays out 3 primary methods: guardrail systems, safety net systems, or personal fall arrest systems.
All right, let's break those down a bit. Guardrails, I think most people are familiar with those, the physical barrier that keeps you from stepping over the edge. Safety nets, those are your backup if a fall does occur. And fall arrest systems, that's where you're thinking harnesses and lanyards, right? Essentially stopping a fall in progress.
Precisely. And choosing the most effective system for a given scenario is crucial. Consider factors like the type of work being done, the site conditions, and even the workers' comfort levels with different systems. Each has its pros and cons. So it's about finding the right fit for the job.
Yeah, it's not as simple as just slapping up a guardrail and calling it a day. You need to think critically about the specific risks and choose the most appropriate protection. Now, what about when you're actually constructing those edges? That's leading edge work, right? And it seems inherently more dangerous.
Leading edges are definitely risky, and Section B2 of the standard addresses those head-on. You need the same types of fall protection, guardrails, nets, or personal systems. For anyone working on a leading edge, 6 feet or more above a lower level, it's about protecting those workers right at the point of construction where the risks are most acute.
But I've heard contractors say sometimes those standard systems just aren't practical for leading edge work.
Yeah.
That they can even create more hazards. There's an exception in the standard, isn't there? Something about it being infeasible or creating a greater hazard.
You're right, there is an exception. And it's a point of much debate in the safety world. Sometimes installing those traditional systems on a leading edge is incredibly difficult, even dangerous. Imagine trying to erect a guardrail system while the edge itself is still being built. It could create tripping hazards or even structural instability.
Okay, so in those cases, what happens? Do workers just go unprotected?
Absolutely not. That's where the fall protection plan comes in. This isn't a free pass to skip fall protection. It's about finding a safer, more tailored solution. If you, as the employer, can demonstrate that the standard systems are infeasible or create a greater hazard, you need a detailed plan outlining alternative measures.
So this plan has to prove that you're not just cutting corners, you're actually improving safety by taking a different approach.
Yeah.
What kinds of things would be included in a solid fall protection plan for leading edge work?
It's all about demonstrating a deep understanding of the risks and how you're mitigating them. You might include things like engineering controls to minimize fall distances, the use of specialized safety equipment designed for leading edge work, or even more frequent safety monitoring by a competent person.
It sounds like thorough documentation is key here. You need to clearly show why the standard systems won't work and how your alternative plan is just as effective, if not more so, at protecting workers.
You got it. Clear documentation protects your workers and protects you. It shows OSHA that you've taken a thoughtful, proactive approach to fall protection, even in challenging situations.
All right, so leading edges. Definitely a situation where a deeper dive into the risks and potential solutions is needed. What's next on our journey through OSHA 1926.501?
Let's move from the edge to a different kind of fall hazard, hoist areas. Section B3 focuses on these zones where materials are being lifted and moved. It might seem obvious, but sometimes we forget that the act of hoisting itself introduces unique fall risks.
Yeah, if I'm picturing this right, we're talking about areas where workers might be exposed to falls due to open edges around the hoisting operation, or while leaning out to guide materials.
Yeah.
Those moments where focus might be on the load and not necessarily on foot placement.
Exactly. The standard specifically mentions situations where guardrails are temporarily removed to facilitate hoisting operations. You're essentially creating a temporary unprotected side. In these cases, workers need to be protected by personal fall arrest systems.
That makes sense. You're anticipating those moments where the usual protection might be compromised and having a backup plan ready to go. It's about thinking a step ahead.
Right. And this highlights a crucial point about fall protection. It's not static, it's dynamic. You're constantly assessing the work environment as it changes and making sure the appropriate protection is there, even during those temporary or shifting conditions.
Okay, so we've tackled unprotected edges, leading edges, and now hoist areas. What other scenarios does 1926.501B cover? I know we're just scratching the surface here.
Well, hold on to your hard hats, because we've got a whole lineup of fall hazards still to explore. We've got holes, formwork and reinforcing steel, ramps and walkways, excavations, even specific activities like overhand bricklaying and roofing work. OSHA really tries to cover all the bases when it comes to fall protection in construction.
Wow, it's pretty incredible how much ground this standard covers. It really speaks to the complexity and the inherent risks of construction work.
It does, and each of these scenarios presents unique challenges that demand tailored solutions. But before we get into those specifics, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned so far about the General Duty Clause and the concept of tailoring fall protection to the task at hand.
That's a great idea. Let's give our listeners a moment to absorb this information and connect it back to their own workplaces. After all, the goal here is to turn knowledge into action, to create safer job sites for everyone.
All right, let's get back to those specific scenarios that OSHA outlines in 1926.501B. I'm curious, have you ever seen any close calls or incidents involving holes on a job site?
Oh, absolutely. You know, one time I was doing a site visit, and there was this hole in the floor, probably about 8 feet across, just covered with a sheet of plywood, no markings, no guardrails, nothing. It was a heart-stopping moment, realizing how easily someone could have stepped onto that and fallen through.
That's exactly the kind of situation 1926.501B4 is designed to prevent. Any hole larger than 6 feet above a lower level needs to be protected. We're talking personal fall arrest systems, sturdy covers that can support the weight of a person, or guardrails around the perimeter. And remember, skylights count as holes too.
Skylights, that's a good point. They're often overlooked, but they pose the same risk as any other opening in a roof or floor. And I like how this section goes beyond just preventing falls through holes. It also addresses tripping hazards and falling objects.
Right. The standard requires covers to prevent workers from accidentally stepping into holes, and also to prevent objects from falling through and potentially striking someone below.
Yeah, it's a reminder that fall protection isn't just about preventing workers from falling. It's also about protecting them from things falling on them. It's a two-way street.
Exactly, a holistic approach to safety. Now, let's shift gears and talk about formwork and reinforcing steel, which are covered in B5. This section focuses on protecting workers who are working on the face of these structures during concrete pours or while setting rebar, for instance.
Formwork and rebar. Those can be tricky surfaces to work on, uneven and slippery. Not to mention the added risk if those structures are high off the ground. What kinds of fall protection does OSHA mandate for this type of work?
The standard calls for personal fall arrest systems, safety nets, or positioning device systems to prevent falls. These systems offer the flexibility and security needed to work on those complex vertical surfaces.
I'm noticing a pattern here. The type of protection is tailored to the unique challenges of the work environment. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
That's a keen observation. Fall protection should always be a thoughtful process considering the specifics of the task and the environment. Now, how about we talk about those elevated pathways that connect different areas of a job site? Ramps, runways, and walkways. They seem pretty straightforward, but are there specific fall protection requirements for those?
I'm guessing guardrails are involved.
You got it. Section B6 addresses these elevated routes. Any walkway that's 6 feet or more above a lower level needs guardrails along the edges. It's all about providing that continuous physical barrier to prevent falls while workers are moving from point A to point B.
Guardrails. They're like the unsung heroes of fall protection. Simple but effective.
Absolutely. Now, let's dig into something a little more complex. Excavations. They're dynamic environments where hazards can change as the work progresses, right?
Excavations can be tricky. I've seen some pretty deep ones. And the thought of a worker falling into one of those is terrifying. How does 1926.501b7 address the fall hazards associated with excavations?
It differentiates between excavations that are readily visible and those obscured by things like plant growth. For visible excavations, 6 feet or more in depth, guardrail systems, fences, or barricades are required. This keeps workers from accidentally stepping or falling into the excavation. But if the excavation is hidden, you need to add covers to the mix.
So it's about preventing those didn't see it coming type falls. It's not enough just to protect the perimeter. You have to consider those hidden hazards as well. That's a smart approach.
Exactly. It's about anticipating all potential scenarios. And speaking of hidden hazards, let's move on to another interesting category. Dangerous equipment.
Dangerous equipment. That sounds pretty broad. What does that encompass?
It refers to any machinery or equipment that poses a fall hazard. Think about large tanks, vessels, or even moving vehicles. Section B8 breaks down protection requirements based on the worker's height relative to the equipment.
So if you're working close to the equipment, say less than 6 feet above it, what kind of protection is required?
In those cases, guardrail systems or equipment guards are sufficient. They prevent falls from a lower height where the consequences might be less severe.
But if you're working higher up, say 6 feet or more above the equipment, things get more serious, right?
You bet. And that height, you need more robust protection. Guardrails, personal fall arrest systems, or safety nets. The higher the risk, the more comprehensive the protection needs to be.
It's all about matching the level of protection to the level of risk. It makes perfect sense. What's next on our OSHA adventure? I know we still have a lot to unpack.
Let's get into some of those specialized activities that have their own unique fall protection challenges. We've got overhand bricklaying, roofing work, precast concrete erection, and residential construction. Each of these activities presents specific risks that OSHA addresses head-on in 1926.501.
I love this part. It shows how OSHA really gets into the nitty-gritty of construction work, recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all solution for fall protection. So let's start with overhand bricklaying. It seems inherently tricky from a fall protection standpoint. How does the standard address this?
Section B9 focuses on this very specific task. It states that anyone doing overhand bricklaying 6 feet or more above a lower level needs to be protected by either guardrail systems, safety net systems, personal fall arrest systems, or they have to work within a controlled access zone.
Okay, we've covered those first three options pretty extensively. But what exactly is a controlled access zone?
Imagine a designated area on a job site where only authorized personnel are allowed, and strict safety measures are in place to prevent falls. It might involve barriers, warning lines, and constant monitoring of the work area by a competent person. It's like creating a bubble of safety around the overhand bricklaying operation.
So it's about minimizing the risk of falls by controlling the environment and limiting access to the hazard zone. It's like creating a safety buffer.
Precisely. And the standard also addresses a specific situation that often arises in overhand bricklaying. If a worker needs to reach more than 10 inches below the level they're working on, they must have fall protection in place.
That makes perfect sense. Leaning over that far creates a significant fall hazard. And it's easy to lose your balance when you're focused on the task at hand.
Right. And it's worth noting that the standard specifically mentions that bricklaying done on scaffolds is covered under a different section of OSHA regulations. Always double check you're referencing the correct section of the standard for the specific task at hand.
Good point. OSHA can be a maze of regulations sometimes, so it's important to know where to look for the specific guidance you need.
Now let's switch gears from bricklaying to something that's probably on every construction site at some point. Roofing work. Section B10 of 1926.501 addresses low-slope roofs.
When you say low slope, what exactly are we talking about?
The standard defines a low-slope roof as one with a slope of less than 4 1/12. Think of a roof with a gentle incline. For these roofs with unprotected edges 6 feet or more above a lower level, workers need protection.
All right, so our magic number of 6 feet comes into play again. And what are the fall protection options for low-slope roofs? Are they the same as what we've seen for other scenarios?
There are a few more options for low-slope roofs. The standard allows for guardrail systems, safety net systems, personal fall arrest systems, or various combinations of warning line systems and those other methods.
Warning lines. We haven't talked about those yet. Can you explain those a bit more?
Picture a designated boundary marked with flags or ropes. Workers aren't allowed to cross that line unless they have fall protection in place. It acts as a visual and physical reminder of the hazard zone. It's like saying, hey, if you step over this line, you better be tied off or have some other form of fall protection.
So it's an extra layer of awareness and control on a roof where the fall hazard might not be as immediately obvious as it is on a steep roof.
Right. And for roofs 50 feet or less in width, the standard even allows for the use of a safety monitoring system alone without a warning line system.
A safety monitoring system. What does that involve?
It relies on having a designated competent person whose sole responsibility is to monitor workers and ensure they're using fall protection correctly. And staying within safe zones. They're like the hawk-eyed guardian of the roof, constantly watching out for potential fall hazards and making sure everyone is working safely.
It's a system built on trust and expertise, relying on the judgment and vigilance of that competent person.
Interesting. Now let's contrast that with steep roofs, which I imagine present a much higher risk of falls. What does Section B11 say about fall protection on those?
The standard is crystal clear on this one. For steep roofs with unprotected sides 6 feet or more above a lower level, you need guardrail systems with toe boards, safety net systems, or personal fall arrest systems. Those warning line and safety monitoring systems we talked about for low-slope roofs, they're not an option here. The steepness of the roof demands a higher level of protection.
So it's all about those robust physical barriers or personal protection to prevent those potentially devastating falls from a steep roof. Exactly. And speaking of specialized activities, Section B12 deals with precast concrete erection. This is a big one in construction, so let's make sure we're all on the same page about the fall protection requirements.
Precast concrete, those are those large, heavy sections of concrete that are fabricated off-site and then lifted into place on the job site. It seems like there would be a lot of inherent fall hazards associated with that kind of work. What does the standard say about it?
The standard states that anyone involved in erecting precast concrete members 6 feet or more above a lower level needs to be protected by guardrail systems, safety net systems, or personal fall arrest systems. And that applies to a wide range of tasks, from erecting wall panels and columns to tasks like routing those members.
So if you're working at height with those precast elements, fall protection needs to be front and center.
Absolutely. And just like with leading edge work, there is an exception if the employer can demonstrate that those standard systems are infeasible or create a greater hazard. But again, that exception requires a well-documented fall protection plan outlining alternative measures that are equally or more effective at protecting workers.
Right. It's not a free pass to skip fall protection. It's about finding a safer solution when the standard solutions just won't work.
And what about residential construction? Does the standard address that specifically? Or are the same general rules applied?
It does address residential construction specifically in Section B13.
Yeah.
The rule is that anyone working 6 feet or more above a lower level needs to be protected by guardrail systems, safety net systems, or personal fall arrest systems. Those core fall protection methods apply across the board, whether it's a skyscraper or a single-family home.
So no cutting corners just because it's a residential project. Fall hazards are just as serious in those settings, even if the scale of the work is smaller. Exactly. A fall from a roof is a fall from a roof, whether it's on a high-rise or a ranch house. And I think the infeasible or creates a greater hazard exception could come into play more often in residential work, given the smaller scale, and sometimes unique layouts of homes.
That's a great point. Sometimes the standard solutions just won't work in those tight spaces or with the unique architectural features you find in residential construction. But again, any alternative plan has to be meticulously documented and demonstrably effective at protecting workers.
Documentation is your best friend when it comes to fall protection. It shows you've thought things through, you've assessed the risks, and you've put a plan in place to address those risks.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yep.
What other specific scenarios are addressed in 1926.501B?
We've got 2 more to go, and then we'll shift gears and talk about those situations where something falls on a worker rather than the worker falling.
Let's do it. I'm eager to hear about these last 2 scenarios and then delve into that other side of fall protection.
All right, let's talk about wall openings. Section B14 mandates protection for anyone working at, above, or near wall openings 6 feet or more above a lower level, especially when the inside edge of the opening is less than 39 inches above the working surface.
So if I'm visualizing this correctly, we're talking about those situations where someone could easily step or fall through an opening in a wall. Maybe they're moving materials through the opening, or they're working near the edge and they lose their balance.
Exactly. And the standard calls for familiar solutions, guardrails, safety nets, or personal fall arrest systems to prevent those falls. It's all about anticipating those points of vulnerability and taking proactive steps to mitigate the risk.
It's like creating a safety net, both literally and figuratively, to catch those workers before a fall occurs.
And finally, we have Section B15, which acts as a catch-all for any walking or working surfaces that haven't been specifically addressed in the previous sections. It states that any employee on a walking or working surface 6 feet or more above a lower level needs to be protected by a guardrail system, safety net system, or personal fall arrest system. It's a reminder that even if a specific scenario isn't spelled out in the standard, the general principles of fall protection still apply.
If it's high and there's a risk of falling, you need protection. It's a simple concept, but it's so easy to overlook in the hustle and bustle of a job site.
You've hit the nail on the head. OSHA 1926.501 aims to be comprehensive in its coverage of fall hazards, ensuring workers are protected in a wide range of situations. But it's up to us, the safety professionals, to apply those principles, to think critically about the risks, and to implement solutions that truly protect workers from harm.
I couldn't agree more. So far, we've focused on preventing workers from falling. But as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to shift the focus to that other side of fall protection, protecting workers from things falling on them. What insights does 1926.501 offer on that front?
That's a crucial aspect of fall protection, and it's addressed in Section C of 1926.501, aptly titled Protection from Falling Objects. It's just as important as preventing falls from heights, and it deserves just as much attention.
Let's delve into that in our final segment. I'm eager to hear its strategies and solutions OSHA recommends for protecting workers from those falling object hazards. All right, we've spent a good chunk of time talking about how to prevent workers from falling, but now let's flip the script and talk about those situations where something falls on a worker. It's easy to focus on those dramatic falls from heights, but falling objects can be just as dangerous, especially on a busy construction site.
Oh, absolutely. And, what's fascinating about this part of the standard is that it really highlights the interconnectedness of safety on a job site. It's not just about individual workers protecting themselves. It's about everyone being aware of the potential hazards they might create for others.
I like that, a sense of collective responsibility for safety. So let's get into the specifics. What does OSHA 1926.501C, protection from falling objects, actually say?
Well, the standard's pretty straightforward. When workers are exposed to potential falling objects, employers must require hard hats and implement additional protective measures. Hard hats are a given on any construction site, but the key here is those additional measures.
Right, because a hard hat can only do so much. So what are those other layers of protection that OSHA recommends?
Well, the standard outlines 3 primary options. First, you can erect toe boards, screens, or guardrail systems along elevated edges to prevent objects from falling off in the first place. Think of it like containing the hazard at its source.
So those act as physical barriers to keep tools, materials, debris, anything that could fall from going over the edge. What are the other options?
Second, you can erect canopy structures designed specifically to catch falling objects. It's like a safety net for tools and debris.
Yeah, I've seen those on some job sites. It's like creating a protected zone underneath those areas where falling objects are a concern.
Exactly. It's about creating a dedicated layer of protection that's separate from the systems you have in place to protect workers from falling themselves. And the third option is a bit more about managing the work environment.
Okay, tell me more about that third option.
It involves barricading the area where objects might fall, prohibiting workers from entering that zone, and keeping potential falling objects away from the edges of higher levels in the first place. It's about controlling the flow of work and materials to minimize the risk of something tumbling over the side.
So it's a combination of access restriction and good housekeeping practices. Keep the work area organized, keep potential falling objects away from edges, and limit worker exposure to those areas where things could fall.
Exactly. It's a multifaceted approach to preventing those oops moments that can lead to serious injuries.
This section really highlights that fall protection isn't just about preventing workers from falling. It's about creating a safe environment where they're protected from all types of fall-related hazards. It's about thinking holistically and anticipating those potential hazards before they turn into accidents.
You got it. And I think what's important to remember is that OSHA 1926.501 isn't just a dry set of rules. It's a framework for thinking critically about fall hazards and developing solutions that truly protect workers. It challenges us to go beyond simply checking boxes and to really understand the why behind the regulations.
It's about fostering a culture of safety where everyone on the job site, from the laborers to the supervisors, understands their role in preventing falls and falling object incidents.
Absolutely. It's about moving beyond compliance and embracing safety as a core value.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the general duty clause to the specific requirements for a wide range of work scenarios, both those that focus on workers falling and those that address the hazards of falling objects. I always find these deep dives into OSHA standards to be so valuable, and I hope our listeners are walking away with a renewed sense of purpose when it comes to fall protection.
I agree. Knowledge is power, but only if we act on it. So as we wrap up, I want to encourage our listeners to take this information back to their job sites and really put it into practice.
What's one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember as they head back out into the field?
I would say this. Fall protection is an ongoing commitment, not a one-time task. It's about constantly assessing, adapting, and striving to create a work environment where falls are not just prevented, but virtually eliminated.
I love that. It's about making safety a habit, a mindset, a part of the very fabric of your work culture. And for our listeners who are looking for more resources and support in building those robust fall protection programs, I want to remind you about Safety One Source. They offer a wide range of training programs, consulting services, and safety products designed to help you create a safer work environment. Check them out.
That's a great resource. And I'd also encourage everyone to access the full text of OSHA 1926.501 and really study it thoroughly. It's a dense document, but it's packed with valuable information that could save lives.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power. And when it comes to safety, that power can translate into preventing injuries and protecting the lives of those we work with.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into OSHA 1926.501. We hope you found it informative and, most importantly, that you'll use this knowledge to make a difference on your job sites. Until next time, stay safe out there.